All right. Shalom, shalom. Call Halayim, La Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushua, Bahashem Kadash. I'd like to give double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone and salutations to the hopeful elect. It's your brother Kodash and I, right? And today we're doing a lesson about self-examination. Now, we're going to open up with the book of Second Corinthians, chapter 13, and verse 5. It says, examine yourselves, whether ye be in the faith. Prove your own selves. Know ye not your own selves, how that Yahweh Shah Hamashiach is in you, except ye be reprobates. And a reprobate is someone who's void of judgment, right? They don't believe, they believe, like the elder Lamadi said in his lesson, dudes that are reprobates, individuals that are reprobates, they have they believe they have immunity from judgment. Excuse me. They believe they have immunity from judgment, and you don't want to be that guy. You don't want to think that because you are you don't want to have that demon on you to think, hey, I'm immune from judgment. I could commit sins and don't believe in my own, and don't believe I'm gonna pay for those sins. You know what I'm saying? So, or that we're under grace so that you can sin freely, which the scripture do say in James the 1st chapter, and also in Sirach the 15th chapter, right? That the Lord didn't give us any license to sin. Okay, so that's a reprobate mind, someone who thinks that it's okay to sin, and that the sins that they commit they won't pay for later on, and that's not the case, right? So I opened up with this 2 Corinthians 13 and 5 because I was watching a lesson that I reposted of the Elder Lamadius, of the Elder Lamadius, yeah, here it is. This is the Elder Lamadius from the main camp, and I reposted his lesson about self-examination. And as I watched through his lesson, I highly recommend you watch it. That's his page there, GMS Playtime Over. It's a very edifying lesson, but it goes heavy into self-examination and really looking at oneself, and asking the self the hard questions, the deep questions that you need to ask yourself, we all been avoiding, and we need to ask ourselves in order to grow, because we're coming up to the time of the Passover. We had Elder Apostle Ramlab and other brothers sounding the trumpet that, hey, the Passover is going to be April 1st, and it is April 1st for you brothers that don't know, right? And it's going to be from April 1st, right, and then to April 8th. So the Passover is only one day. We're going to make that clear. It's April 1st, right? From April 2nd to April 8th, that's the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because as you know through scripture, right, following the Passover is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Unleavened means yeast, right? That's an old English way of saying yeast. So for that entire week from April 2nd all the way up to we're really starting April 1st all the way up to April 8th, during the time of the Passover up until the end of the Passover, which will be April 8th, you're not supposed to be eating anything with yeast in it. No bread, no cookies, no bagels, nothing, right? And also getting the leaven out your house, because that's also part of the ceremony and the practice of the Passover, is getting the leaven out your house. If you need instructions and help with that, refer to Exodus the 12th chapter, because Exodus the 12th chapter is straightforward and basic, instructions on the Passover, because that was the first Passover recorded, was Exodus the 12th chapter, right? That's when the Lord was giving instructions to the nation of Israel on how to keep the Passover, right? The first ever Passover, when it was really instituted, you know. But yeah, just when you do keep the Passover, just make sure you don't have any that you're staying away from leaven, yeast, right? Foods with yeast on it. And also, I posted on my page, my YouTube page, right? I know, not YouTube. I'm sorry, TikTok page. I posted on my TikTok page. Uh, I posted a list, right? I posted a list, you know, from a post that I saved of the elder Amon Gabar from the main camp. He and this was a while ago. This probably was a year ago. Yeah, this was a year ago, and he gave a list of like different names that food products have for yeast. So you can you can save this list. Take a screenshot. Save it. You can also go on my page, Feeding the Sheep 144, and you could just download it there. Right, it's free to download, but just save this, write this down if you need to. This will be good as a reminder because as you're keeping the Passover, you might slip up because we're still in the flesh. We're still battling against this flesh. So you might slip up. You might eat yeast by mistake and think that, oh, it wasn't, no, it didn't say yeast in it, but it said baking soda, or it said sodium bicarbonate, which is another way of saying yeast. So you got to know the terms, right? The other names that yeast is called in food products, so you can avoid the yeast, right? So just do your best to try to not to eat as much yeast as possible. Okay. Okay, and if you need help, like I said, keeping the Passover, it's always good to refer to Exodus the 12th chapter because, you know, that's basically clear directions on how to keep the Passover. Exodus the 12th chapter. Just read that entire chapter and it'll give you the details, instructions on how to keep the Passover. Now there's certain things you're not going to be able to keep during the Passover, right? Like you read in the Exodus 12th chapter, which I didn't read in a while, but remembering that you're supposed to roast a whole lamb, right? You can also eat sheep as well, like goat. If you don't want to eat lamb, you can also have the option of eating goat, right? With the lamb, we can't, we're not sovereign, right? We don't have those type of resources where we can get a whole lamb. If you do, that's cool. You know what I'm saying? But even if you get a whole lamb, we can't, tell the condition of lamb if it have blemishes or not. So everything right now we're doing is rehearsal, right? Like it says in Colossians, the second chapter, it's a foreshadowing to the things to come. So we're going to keep it perfectly in the kingdom. But right now we're doing the best that we can within the resources that we have, right? So when you do get your lamb, you want to you want to get lamb or some goat. If you can't get the lamb, get some goat and then just roast it. Do not season it. Don't season it, just roast it. Get some tortilla chips, right? Get some horseradish, you know and some wine. You know what I'm saying? But also too, you can also check out the elder pages because they also, brothers, you know I know as we're coming closer to the Passover later this week or maybe next week, brothers, I share videos on the elders lessons on the Passover, how to keep it properly, and the instructions there. But those instructions are out there. you know it just takes a little searching on your part, but those instructions are out there on how to keep the Passover. So the best advice, I'm giving you is best advice I can give you is, just refer back to, especially if this is your first time, just read Exodus the 12th chapter. Roast the lamb, eat your horseradish, right? Get you some corn tortilla chips because it's corn. There's no yeast in it, right? And have a little cup of wine. Throw up some prayers to Yahweh Shema Shah. Go read into the Psalms, wherever the Spirit leads you into the Psalms, and then that'll be that. You eat your Passover meal in haste. Eat it quickly. It's not like It's not like a regular meal where you can take your time and you might be watching TV on your phone. No, no, no. This you gotta eat it in haste. So you just gobble that thing up. You think you give praises to Yahweh Shema Shai, gratitude. Make the supplication of thanksgiving, showing gratitude to Yahweh Shema Shai that you was able to participate in the Passover and that you're found worthy. You know what I'm saying? Thanking him that you're covered by the blood of Yahweh Shai, and that you're found worthy, to escape, these troubles which is to come, to escape judgment. Because the time of the Passover, for those of you who don't know, is a time of heavy judgment. Like as it was in during the first Passover, during the time of ancient Egypt, when our forefathers was in Egypt, right, and the Passover was established, you had the destroyer, which is Yahweh Shai, passing over, over all the homes in Egypt, right, and the ones in the homes that didn't have the blood of the lamb sprinkled over their doorposts, right, they firstborns died when he passed over their home. You see, so that was heavy judgment, and that judgment, great judgment, not just within Israel, right? Not just within those that know that they're Israelites, but also on a global stage, right? On the main stage, right? And within the world, judgment be happening. So it's a time of heavy judgment, and it fits perfectly in this topic of self-examination because you want to purge out that old leaven, right? The same way how when you read Exodus the 12th chapter, it requires you to get rid of yeast out of your home, right? And not to even have yeast in your house. And even with that, again, like I said earlier, we keep it to the best of our ability because you might not have your own crib. You might share a room or share a space, and you can't, and that person that you sharing a space with, that's their bread, or you can't get rid of the bread. That's okay. The Lord understands your situation. The thing is to worry about what you can do, right? Focus on what you can do, right? Because the Lord understands the intents of the heart, and he knows that you have, that if you are sincere and you're being serious, he's respect that. He's going to honor that, right? But don't stress if you can't get rid of the leaven, some cookies or some cake or, brownies or, bagels, right? Because your wife or roommate or the people that you share your living space with, they that's their stuff, or they don't want to get rid of that stuff. You know what I'm saying? So, don't be over righteous and then cause strife in your home because you arguing with them and they're not in the faith. Remember, you're doing this for your own salvation, and that takes me to this scripture here. And it all ties into self-examination, because when you examining yourself, who could better know you than yourself, right? Yahweh Shah HaMashiach, which represent the word, going back to John 1:14, is in us. So with the word, we got that light to be able to shine on what we need to work on and what we need to prove within ourselves, right? And what I said earlier remind me of this, Philippians 2:12. This is Philippians chapter 2, verse 12. It says, "Wherefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling." So see, this is about your salvation. This is not about, you're not doing this for me. You're not doing this for brothers. Don't be a YouTube Israelite. Don't be, what I mean, a YouTube Israelite, I'm talking about a brother that you just look stoic on camera, but you a nigga in real life. Don't do it for in other words, don't be out and don't try to, change. That's what I'm trying to say, is change, right? You should want you should want a renewed mind. You should be praying to the Lord to work on your weaknesses, to really change and improve yourself, working on yourself, not just, trying to play it off as if when you're around brothers, or if you do teach, right? Because not every member of the body is a teacher, but for those that are teachers, right? Don't be an individual that's on the camera and you playing off as, hey, you the stoic brother, or you good and you solid, but really, you a nigga behind the scenes. We all have shortcomings. Now, I'm not coming against the brothers that have shortcomings. I have shortcomings. You have shortcomings, right? But I'm talking about individuals that's trying to fake the funk. Don't do that, right? If you serious and you sincere, this is about your salvation. Your soul is on the line, right? We don't know if we have the elect. We hope that we have the elect. We put on as the elect, as the scriptures say, right? We put on as the elect. Salakia. Yeah, Salakia. We do as the elect. That's what I'm trying to say. Because I don't want to say that, and then it doesn't say that exactly. But we put what we do as the elect would do, right? We would do as the elect would do, right? And we hope. That's why the scripture says in I gotta bring that out. I think it's Zephaniah 9:3 or 9:4. We're prisoners of hope because we hope to be saved. We hope that the works that we're doing, the Lord remembers and shows us mercy in the time of Jacob trouble, show us mercy in the hour of temptation, preserves us, really preserve us, not just show us mercy, but preserve us in the hour of temptation, preserve us in Jacob trouble, right? Because the salvation is guaranteed for the elect, but we don't know if we are the elect. So that's where the fear and trembling comes from, right? Because you don't know. You don't know if you are of the 144,000. You don't know if you are the 1/3. We're doing the things that the elect would do, right? But we don't know. So scripture tell you in Matthew 24:13, the Lord said it. He said, "He who endures to the end, the same shall be saved." You don't know if you're gonna endure to the end. That's where the fear comes in. You don't know if you're gonna make it through with your faith intact. You know what I'm saying? There's many brothers that came into this faith, and many brothers, not brothers anymore, but is many men, individuals came into this faith, and they fell out. That's why the elders, coined this truth as a revolving door. As just as many as came came into this truth, many is falling out. And don't be surprised, if you hear accounts after the Passovers of brothers departing from the faith, because that's that time. Remember, the elders coined this year, the apostates, sellouts, and spies, man. So we're really in that time where the Lord is kind of like cleaning house. He's sifting right now, getting rid of impurities, right, amongst Israel. The ones that's not serious, the ones that's not sincere, the ones that's not committed, they're gonna get sifted out. Just like how you would take corn and sieve, or you would take flour and you would sieve the flour to get that smoothness. Same thing. The Lord is sifting through Israel, right? And the ones that are sincere, right? That's on fire, that want to do the work and that want to be a part of the truth, the Lord going to keep ultimately because they are the elect. But then the 2/3, the ones that's not serious, not sincere, lukewarm, right, half-hearted, wishy-washy, the Lord gonna get rid of them. So that's the fear. We're prisoners of hope. Let me bring that precept out. Prisoners of hope, right? That's also part of self-examination, because as a prisoner of hope, you always got to know where your faith stands. If Elder Mahdia from the main camp, he said in one of his later lessons, a couple months back, if you, regarding the topic of faith, right, if you were to lose, you got to make self-assessments, right? If you were to lose your arm, your leg, would you still keep the faith? If you were to lose your arm, would you still keep the faith? If you would lose your leg, right, would you still keep the faith? If you were to lose your health, would you still keep the faith? If you were to lose your fingers, would you still keep the faith? If you were to lose certain things, certain aspects, you know what I'm saying? And just not verbatim, but the point that the elder was making in his lesson was that you want to, you gotta ask yourself these questions and put yourself in these scenarios mentally, right? If certain scenarios would have happened, would you give up? Would you lose the faith in these certain scenarios? If they throw you in a concentration camp, would you lose the faith? If they torture you to death, would you lose the faith? You got to think on that level because we're in that time, right? Revelation 1 and 3. Blessed he who readeth and understand the words of these prophecies, for the time is at hand. We're in that time right now. We're in the time of prophecies being fulfilled, and going, and our temptation is prophecy, right? Because that's been prophesied, right? That the elect will go through that, you know, being thrown into concentration camps, right? And some being martyred for Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua, for the witness and testimony of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua. So it's already been prophesied that elect we're gonna have to go through this, and also our temptation that the elect we're gonna have to go through that, our temptation. Okay, so with all this being said, right, that the elect we gotta go through the our temptation, we gotta go through Jacob's trouble. You know, you gotta really get to a point where you constantly meditating about that question, you know, on a daily. Like, damn, if I lose certain things in my life, the point being is, if I lose certain things in my life, would I give up on the Lord because I lost those things? And the answer should be no. You know, if you lose relationship with your family for this truth, would you give up on the Lord? If you lose, if people in your family start to transition, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your cousin start to transition, and you understand what I mean by transition, right? RIP, you know, God forbid, you know, because we don't want that for our families. But again, you know, transition happens, you know, that's just a natural part of life. So if these things were to happen, would you give up the faith? Would you surrender? Just something to think about, you know. But this is Zechariah 9 and 12. It says, turn you to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope. Even today do I declare that I will render double unto thee. All right, because, you know, the Lord going to reward us handsomely. You know, you got to think about the testimony of Job. I'll tell you that in James, the 5th chapter. James 5 and 10. You know, remembering the testimony of Job, because what Job went through, right, was a test of his faith. His faith was on trial. And guess what? He passed the trial. So at the end, the Lord rewarded him twice as what he lost before. The Lord blessed him with twice as much as he gave him before, right? Twice as much. Okay, and he lived a long life. You know what I'm saying? And he was fulfilled. How much more when the Lord told us, when you go back to Revelation, I'm going to bring that out, Matthew the 19th chapter. The Lord said, if you give up your mother, your father, right, land for me, I'm going to give you 100-fold. So what would that blessing look like, right? That'll be the kingdom of heaven. And nobody knows what's within the kingdom of heaven, right? We get hints and ideas through the scriptures, but nobody really knows. That's why the scripture said, no eye have seen nor ear have heard the things that, you know, that the Lord have in store for those who love him. So for you sincere members, right, you sincere Akim and Aqua, you brothers and sisters, man, we got a great reward coming. See what the scripture said here? It said, render double unto thee. So could you imagine what will be rendered unto us for serving him in these times, for staying 10 tones down, right? We was put in different scenarios, and we didn't lose our faith. We didn't break our integrity. Could you imagine what the reward would be? I mean, it's exciting, but we don't know. I don't know. I don't know what my reward would be. I don't know what your reward would be, but it's going to be a great reward, but we got to endure. Like, go back to Galatians 6 and 9, right? Where the scripture says, and I remember it verbatim, but it says, let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap a harvest if we faint not, roughly paraphrasing. Got to remember that. You want that, the kingdom, you want the reward that the Lord has in store for you in the kingdom, right? You gotta continue the good works, which is serving the Lord, doing what's pleasing to the Lord, doing righteous, rehearsing the righteous acts. What I'm doing is rehearsing the righteous acts, which is teaching. That's my lot, right? You gotta walk in your lot. Rehearsing those righteous acts is walking in your lot. If you're a friend of the prophet, be a friend of the prophet. If you If you know what I'm saying, you bless the prophets, you know, you give tithings, give tithings. If the Lord put it on your spirit to just, bless brothers with supplies, do that. If you will repost individual, because you got some sisters that do that too. They repost lessons. Do that. You know what I'm saying? Do your part. Do what the assignment the Lord gave you. I'm doing my assignment, which was to teach. You know what I'm saying? That's my assignment. But we all got assignments, and if we continue to fulfill our assignment, right? Well, and perform our lot, whatever that may be in this ministry, we're gonna get rewarded. We're gonna get rewarded. So, damn, what was I was trying to think. What was the scripture I was thinking about? Oh yeah, Matthew 19. See, subtitle: The disciples' reward. This is Matthew 19:27. Then answered Peter and said unto him, Behold, we have forsaken all and followed thee. What shall we have therefore? So the apostle Peter was asking, well, the disciple Peter at this time, right? Later became an apostle, right? So Peter was asking Yahweh Shai, okay, basically we forsaken everything. So what are we gonna get for forsaking everything, right? For leaving, basically they left the world behind. They everything that they, you know, cherished, everything that mattered, right? They left that behind to follow after Yahweh Shai. You know, they detached themselves from those things. That's not to say that they didn't enjoy life or they wasn't fulfilled, but rather they didn't cherish those things anymore. They didn't cherish those things as much as they cherished the truth.